second session today at Distributed 2019. Super excited to have Joff Redfern here with us today, VP of Product at Atlassian, also has ran product teams at Yahoo and LinkedIn, years and years experience in building products and building teams. So thanks so much for joining us.
As Barbara said, I've been a vice president of product here in Silicon Valley for a very long time. I've been super fortunate in that I've started companies, sold a company, took a company public with LinkedIn. So I've been able to see how product is built at different size organizations, and that's been incredibly valuable in my career. Currently, I am at Atlassian. I've been here for a little over 2 years. I'm a VP of product reporting to one of the founders. Just prior to this, I was at LinkedIn during its hyperscaling phase. So I spent 7 years at LinkedIn. I joined when it was about 450 employees, and then I left when it was 10,000. So seeing a company go through that hyperscaling was also invaluable to me. What I thought we would chat about today, I'll take about 30 minutes, and I'll tell you how I think about building and scaling product teams. What I did is I took out 8 key learnings that I've had over my career. But it really starts here. If you're a product leader, I'll often say to my team, your first job is to build the team. So it's not to build product, it's to build the team that will build the product. And I love to use this metaphor, the shipyard metaphor. I grew up on Cape Cod, which is a little spit of sand out in the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast of the United States. And I saw a lot of boats growing up on the ocean. And what always intrigued me is what kind of shipyard was needed to build those boats. And your products, which are your ships, can only be as strong as the shipyard that builds them. So I'll say that again, your ships, which are your products, can only be as strong as the shipyard that builds them. So imagine if you wanted to win the America's Cup, a 160-year-old race. Well, you're gonna need to hire people who are really good with carbon fiber. The boats have more to do with aerodynamics than they do with boats these days. You'll need to have strong technologists on the team, right? There'll be hundreds of sensors on the boat collecting 16 gigabytes of data over the course of that journey. If you were trying to build an oil tanker to move oil from continent to continent, these boats are sometimes as much as 1,200 feet long. They could fit 5 football fields. So the kind of people that we would need in that shipyard would have to be really great with steel. They'd have to be working in large scale. Just the structural dynamics would need to be really strong. So that metaphor helps me think about the kind of team that I'm trying to build as a product leader. So what makes a shipyard? Over the years, I've boiled it down to really these 3 things, trying to keep it super simple. The shipyard, that thing that's going to build your products, it's going to be built on the values of the company. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The kinds of people that you hire and bring into the organization are so important. And then the practices. What are the things that we do as a group that allows us to build our software? So what I thought I would do is I'd run through each of those. And again, I'm going to focus on some of the key learnings in each of these areas, and go ahead and drop some questions in there, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. I only have 1 slide on values, because unless you're a small organization, your ability to restructure your values is probably pretty low. You join an organization, they have a value system. It's important to understand that value system, believe in that value system. Peter Drucker, who was a management consultant, later on a professor, had this phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that basically means that if fundamentally your company doesn't have a sound value system and the people in the system are not exhibiting those values, then your company can only be as good as your value system. I love the Atlassian values. There's 5 of them, and you can tell that they're written by Australians. Open company, no bullshit. Australians are very blunt, straightforward people. Don't F the customer. Again, just really clear to the employees what we value as a company. I want to share with you one of the great lessons that I learned about a value system. It was from Alan Blue, who is one of the founders of LinkedIn. When I joined LinkedIn, my first assignment was to work with Alan on a special project. And the very first day that I showed up at LinkedIn, I went to Alan's desk and Alan said, great, let's go to a room and we're going to go to a whiteboard. And on the way to that room, we stopped in one of the areas to grab some drinks. And I grabbed some tea and I was pouring some honey into my cup. And in the corner of my eye, I saw Alan leaving to go towards that room. And I was very nervous that Alan was gonna lose me. So I quickly moved my honey out of away from the tea, and a bunch of it dripped on the counter. And in the corner of the eye, Alan had looked back and he was seeing what I was doing and I was running to catch him. But Alan saw that I had dripped some honey on the counter and he walked past me as I was walking towards him and silently grabbed a sponge, picked up the honey, and then walked back. And he didn't say anything about it. But what I realized was that Alan was showing me one of the core values of LinkedIn, which is act like an owner. And on the very last day that I was at LinkedIn 7 years later, I remember I was in the cafeteria and it was a much bigger company at that time, thousands of people in the cafeteria, and someone had dropped some salad on the floor. And here I am, a vice president, I put down my tray, and rather than waiting for someone in the kitchen staff to pick up the salad, I walked over and I picked it up. And a number of people around me stopped what they were doing and they helped me pick it up. Because if I dropped salad in my house, I wouldn't leave it on the floor waiting for someone else to clean it up. I would act like an owner. So the core message here is understand your value system. And as leaders, you have to really model it. And that wonderful lesson that Alan showed me really carries forward as I try to live the values that we have here at Atlassian. So I want to talk about people. Again, in that shipyard, you have to think about, well, who are the people that we're bringing into the system to build the kinds of products? Who are they? What are they like? What are the skill sets that they need? You know, most companies don't spend enough time trying to answer this very simple question. Every employee wants to know, what do you expect of me? Like, what do you expect of me? When I came to Atlassian, I got all of the product leaders together and I asked a very simple question. I said, what does it mean to be an Atlassian product manager? What's the Atlassian way? There's 27,000 product managers in Silicon Valley. What makes us unique? What makes us special? What makes us different? And that put us on a journey of documenting what we valued, what were the traits, the behaviors, and the expectations that we had for our product leaders. And in most companies, what you'll see is that the hiring that you do and then the performance review that you have on an annual or semi-annual basis for your employees, and then growth conversations, how you do learning and development for your employees, all of that is built off of these expectations. So if in your company, you don't know what's expected of you as a product leader or a designer or an engineer, it's really important to stop what you're doing and to outline that and to articulate it. So I want to share with you how we went about doing that. I had these product leaders pulled together. We said, well, what are the skills and traits that we value? And there was over 39 different skills and traits that we value. We said, well, that's not simple. We need to boil it down to what are the core values? What are the core expectations? We ran some surveys. We did some benchmarking. Company A, B, and C are all companies that you'd be familiar with. And we said, look, if you're an Atlassian product manager, we're going to value 4 things. We want you to lead and inspire. We want you to have product mastery. We want you to drive results. And then we want you to be a great communicator. And many of you who are paying attention and astute will say, wait a minute, you can't be the first 3 unless you're a great communicator. So why do you call out great communicator? A great product leader really has to be such a strong communicator. That's one of the common areas that people fail as product leaders. So we broke it out separately so that we can put some additional attention on it. And then what we did with those traits is we went through and we said, well, let's take our individual contributor track and let's take our let's take our manager track, and we're going to build a whole job architecture around it. So you can see here's an example. It's from our Confluence page. On our Confluence page, any employee can go and they can look up the job architecture for a product manager, and they can say, oh, that ranges from an associate product manager to a distinguished PM. And these are the, at each different level, we show you against those 4 expectations: leads and inspires, product mastery, drives outcomes, and great communicator. What are some of the traits and behaviors that we expect of you? And it's really clear to each of the product managers, and we try to drive that home. So I want to go into a third, one of the third lessons about the talent, the people in the shipyard. You know, after knowing what you expect of me as a product manager, I want to know how I fit in the organization. What are my roles and responsibilities vis-a-vis others that I'm going to be working with? And importantly, one of the common patterns that we see in technology companies is that a product will be led by a product manager, an engineer, and a designer. We'll call that a triad. In other places, it might be led by a general manager, as an example. But really establishing for your company how those roles and responsibilities around leadership are going to be different is really important to call forward. I've spent a lot of time with the chief technology officer and the chief design officer at Atlassian, trying to, in the simplest terms, describe what the difference between a product manager, an engineer, and a designer is as they get together and they try to lead a company. I was challenging us to get it down to 6 words. We have a few more words than 6 here. But the product manager is really, for us, it's about the what and the why. Why are we entering the space? How are we going to measure success? What are the features that we're going to prioritize? The engineer is responsible for how it gets built. When does it ship? Is it reliable? And then the designer is responsible really for that customer experience. What's the mental model and behavior of the software that we're building? These are not hard and rigid. We've got some teams where the engineer might also take on the product management responsibility, as an example. So we might have a team in the platform area that we feel like the engineer can do both the product management and the engineering responsibilities. But that's really key to have. One of the things that I see very commonly in companies, especially hyper-scaling companies, is that there'll be confusion around those roles and responsibilities. So I'm going to give you a pro tip here. There's a model out there, a decision-making model called a DACI. There's also another one that I used at LinkedIn called a rapid model. Both of them, they come from management consulting. I think Rapid was developed by the Boston Consulting Group. But for any major decision that you have, and defining roles and responsibilities is considered a major decision that you might have, you can use this decision-making framework, and I'm going to walk you through an example of that. DACI is an acronym. It stands for driver. So who's driving the decision? Who's going to ensure that within a timely manner, we're making this decision? The A is the approver. That is the person who is the single person accountable for making this decision. There's contributors. We're going to go and we're going to find some experts to help us make an informed decision. And then there are people who are going to be informed, right? So the DACI is an acronym for those sets of roles. I'm going to show you a real life case here. So we, in our strategic planning that we do on an annual basis, there was a bunch of tasks that needed to happen. And there was some confusion around who was actually responsible for either driving the task and making the decision on the task. So what we did is we took these 5 people who all need to contribute to our planning cycle. We said there's the product manager, the program manager, business operations, finance, and analytics. And we said for each of the tasks that runs down the y-axis, we said who's going to make that decision, who's the approver, who's driving the decision, and who's contributing to it. So in a very simple format, we could take a lot of complexity that was creating a tremendous amount of swirl for these different actors around our annual planning. And we simplified it down. We had a discussion, we had agreement, and we were able to move on. So DACI or Rapid, if you're not familiar with them, absolutely look them up on the web. They're a great tool, and I use them all the time. One of the things that I've learned along the way about people in the shipyard is that you're building a championship team versus building a family. And I learned this particularly in my startup days, because I would be spending just a tremendous amount of time with the people that I'm working with. In a lot of respects, they felt like family, but they're different from family, because family is unconditional love. Even if that person is a complete screw up or not doing a great job, I still love them. And that's different from a championship team, where I start to think about, no, actually, I'm trying to build a team which is going to build amazing software, and I want to be thoughtful about that. One of the books and shows that really opened my eyes up to what it meant to be a championship team was a book by Michael Lewis, Moneyball. Many of you might have seen the movie with Brad Pitt. It's chronicling the story of the Oakland A's general manager in the 70s, Billy Beane. And what Billy Beane was trying to do was he was trying to, on a very tight budget, build a world-class baseball team. And the way that he was trying to do it was to start to look at some statistics and look at batting averages and slugging averages and a whole bunch of different statistics. And that way he was trying to design the perfect team for the Oakland A's. And if you think about it, as product leaders and managers in business, we don't spend enough time really trying to get the right people in the right roles. And I have a whole small bag of tricks for trying to understand what are people good at and what do people want to be good at. And then designing a team where I've got the right set of skills between both the product leader, the engineer, and the designer. So really being thoughtful about that. I'm going to show you one of the tools. As a product manager, I have this thing called a product craft triangle. You can read about it. I wrote an article on it on LinkedIn 4 or 5 years ago. And what I say to a product person is I said, you have to be a blend of 3 really important skills. A general manager, you can't just build a great product, you also need to build a great business. You have to be a bit of a scientist using the scientific method. If you think about the whole lean product movement, it's all about build, measure, and learn. That's the scientific method in action. And then you also have to be a great artist. Artists have really high aesthetic sensibility. They think about how to simplify things for the consumer. They're good at understanding what future trends are. But each of us as a product leader, we're a blend of those 3 skills. But if you ask someone and you say, hey, what do you think, where do you think your dot is on the triangle? They'll often tell you that they lean into 1 or 2 of those triangles. And that's really helpful for me. And I'll give you an example of that. If I'm building a growth team, and that growth team is going to be doing lots of experimentation, lots of A/B testing, I want to find someone who is a good scientist and really wants to be an amazing scientist. I need some of that blood on the team. So that was a learning for me. Watch the movie, think about when you're designing teams, do you have the right people in the right role? And think about some of these simple methods that you can use to try to understand that better. Okay, so that's a few of the learnings on the people side of the shipyard. Let's turn our attention to practices. What are the methodologies? What are the processes that we're going to use to run that shipyard? The first is something that I learned from the cultural document that came out by Netflix in 2009. And Netflix at that time was really a hyperscaling company. And what they had realized is that they needed people who were loosely coupled, right? They were leaders that are loosely coupled but tightly aligned. And that made a lot of sense to me. Years later, I read a book by Daniel Pink, a great book called Drive, about what motivates people to come to work and really enjoy work. And you would think that money would be the number 1 factor, and money to an extent is an important factor in work. But what it really boils down to, happiness at work comes from 3 things. Do you have purpose in your work? Do you have autonomy in your work? You're not getting micromanaged. And do you have mastery? Do you have the ability to become a master at what you're doing? So it really signaled to me that autonomy is something that you need to establish in your organization. Peter Thiel talked about this. Stephen Bungay has also, I saw just a few days ago, a nice video that he had put on this very topic. And they were talking about inside an organization, that organization or that team can be built where you have high alignment, low alignment, and you have low autonomy and high autonomy. And what you're looking for is you're looking for these environments where I'm loosely coupled and tightly aligned, meaning I have high autonomy, but we are also highly aligned. If I had high autonomy, but I had low alignment, for example, that would mean that me and all my peers, it'd be a free-for-all, right? Like, hey, we have our own autonomy to run our own business lines, but we're not aligned to the corporate initiative. We're just these free radicals in the system, so you're on your own. Another example would be if we were low autonomy and yet high alignment, that might feel more like a dictatorship, or it might come across as being conformist, very authoritative style. And for some organizations that might make sense. If you're just a small startup, you might have a visionary founder and they are going to make the calls, and we're going to be highly aligned around what that leader wants to do. But me as an individual inside the system, I have low alignment because I'm taking direction from that leader. But once you get into the larger scaling, fast scaling companies, what you're really looking for is high alignment, high autonomy. Think about the Three Musketeers slogan, all for one for all, right? So all of us are working towards the same one objective. And one for all is basically saying we're not going to leave anyone behind in that journey. So think about that in your organization. Do you have autonomy or not? If you don't, I want to show you another tool. This is a tool about how to give and get autonomy. So we had a large number of managers out there. So for you managers, pay attention to this one slide. This slide was a gift from Jay Simons. Jay Simons is the president at Atlassian. One of our first, I think it was the first week I was here, Jay and I were talking about this need to make sure that we have autonomy for the people that we're working with. And he said, oh, I have a great decision framework. It's a tree analogy that we use when I sit down with people that work for me. And I tell those people that there's gonna be lots of decisions that they need to make, and I don't need to be a part of. And we're gonna call those leaf decisions. You make it, you don't need to tell me about it. There are some bigger decisions that we're gonna make that are branch decisions. Still want you to have a lot of autonomy. You're gonna make those, but they're important enough that you should tell me about them. And then we have a trunk decision. Those are really valuable. Those are big bets for our organization. I want to make those with you together. So you're going to come in, you're going to provide some options and a recommendation, but together we'll make the decision. And then finally, there'll be very, very few selective, but there will be root decisions. And in those root decisions, I'm going to make them and I'm going to tell you about them. So I use this with everyone that works for me. I also use this with my boss. So my boss is the co-CEO and co-founder of Atlassian. And every so often we've run into a point where I'll say, Mike, I think this is a branch decision. I'm going to make it. Do you agree with that? Or Mike might say, hey, look, I know we haven't had this before, but I think this is a root decision. I'm going to make it. I want your input, but I'm going to make it, and I'll tell you about that. And just having that ability to have that conversation with the person that I work for is so, it's so refreshing because it reminds the person working for me that my goal is to give you as much autonomy as possible. I don't want to micromanage you. You won't want to work here or for me if that were to be the case. I'm going to share with you another really fundamental core belief that I have as a product leader. This lesson comes to me from Fred Kaufman. Fred Kaufman's done a lot of writing. You can see Fred's done some work on LinkedIn Learning. He's on YouTube. He's written a couple books. Fred was at LinkedIn as both a management consultant, leadership consultant. He was a professor of economics at MIT. And Fred, I remember this clear as day. He came in, the product leaders of LinkedIn were getting together for an offsite. And Fred get up and he talked about this. He gave us this lesson, and he starts with a soccer team. And he says, okay, we have a soccer team, and what is the goal of the defense? Like, what's the purpose of defense? And he asked this question, and a lot of hands go up. And the most common answer is the goal of the defense is to prevent goals from going in from the opposing side. And he says, okay, that is the most common answer. But if that were to be true, then your defenders would prefer to lose a game 0-1 than to win a game 5-4, because in the losing they only prevented one goal from going in, and in the winning game they failed to prevent 4 goals from going in. And he said that's actually not the goal of defense. The goal of defense is to win the game. And therein lies the difference between a global optima and a local optima. So when you're working for a company, most companies have these silos and they have these product teams, and they're focused on that game that they're playing. Oh, I'm responsible for making sure that Jira is successful. And that, you might have that leader thinking about that. That's the local optima. That's not the role of the Jira leader. The role of the Jira leader is to win the game. And the game that we're playing at Atlassian is broader than just Jira. So that means that sometimes we'll have these conversations where we say, we have to sub-optimize the local optima to win the global optima. And that has us moving people around from time to time. So we might come into a group and I'll say, look, I'm going to give up 15 people over to this other team because that's more important to the global optima. That means that I'm not going to be able to do all that work that I needed to do, let's say, over in one of my other products. But that doesn't matter because this other initiative is more important for us strategically. So that's a great lesson. Look at Fred's stuff. I encourage you to adopt that language. Just even talking within your leadership teams, global optima versus local optima is a great step forward. Planning should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. I'm going to show you a tool that I've used for the past decade. And really the magic of this tool in planning is the constraint. So think about a tool that a company like Amazon uses for their planning cycle. They're famous for these 6-pagers where someone on a product team, engineer, designer, product person will write a 6-pager, and then the leadership team at Amazon will read that 6-pager, and then they'll comment. So that's how they run their business. Well, what's the magic of the 6-pager? The magic of the 6-pager is that it's constrained to 6 pages and that it's not in slides. So it forces you to really think about what it is that you're doing, how you're going to win, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to show you a different tool. This is called the VSOP, and it's a vision, strategy, objectives, and priorities. For the last decade, any team that I had during a planning cycle will go through and we will fill this template out. And the magic of this template, and I'll walk through it, I'll give you an example too. But the magic of it, as I'll say to the people that are filling it out, that leadership team that's filling it out for the product, I'll say, you can't use a font smaller than 11 point. And when you can only have 11 point in one page, you sure as heck need to know in super simple terms what it is that you are doing. So what is a VSOP? It starts with the vision. What's the vision for the product? It's the dream, it's the true north. It inspires and creates a shared purpose. And I'll show you an example here of what that looks like. Strategies, I worked with Jeff Weiner for 9 years. He's the CEO of LinkedIn. We worked together as well over at Yahoo, and he pounded this into my head. He said, a strategy is how you navigate a competitive landscape to achieve your objectives. So always remember that. A strategy is how you navigate a competitive landscape. If you're doing what your competitors are doing, then you're not going to beat your competition. You can't beat the competition by being the competition. So when you think about navigating a competitive landscape, it forces us to think about how we're different. Then we have objectives. How are you going to measure success? How are we going to measure success of those strategies? The strategies drive us closer to the vision. The objectives, oftentimes we're using OKRs, are measuring success towards that project progress. And then priorities are the things that we're going to do. I'm going to ship this feature. I'm going to ship that feature. I'm going to buy this company. Whatever those priorities are, they're stacked, ranked in order. There's a small set of them, and the OKRs are going to measure those. The jobs to be done are describing, you're familiar, many of you are familiar with it. If you're not familiar with jobs to be done, it's really the value propositions of your product. It's the benefit or the advantage that the product promises to deliver to the customer. We state those simply, and then the target segment. Sometimes I'll go into a team and I'll ask the simple question, who's this built for? Like who are you targeting it? And when that team can't answer that simple question, they're not on the same page. So let's take an example. I'm going to use Twitter in 2009. This is an old example. And if you worked at Twitter and it's not right, forgive me, but it is an illustration. Back in 2009, when Twitter was a smaller company, a document got leaked when they were trying to raise money. And I took that document and I had an insight in that period of time of what Twitter was trying to accomplish. They have to go back into 2009. They had this vision to be the pulse of the planet. I love that vision, right? There's something goes on over in Iran or Iraq and we learn about it, or a dictator somewhere gets overturned, or politics or entertainment. They really are the pulse of the planet. So they're fulfilling that vision quite well. Back then they had a strategy. You might remember back in 2009, Twitter didn't really exist. So there was something called blogging, which was long form blogging. The problem with long form blogging is you needed a shitload of time to sit down and be thoughtful to write something. And then a problem with that is you might write something and be really thoughtful, and then in the comments, someone might come and lambaste you. So the benefit of microblogging is you could write, it was constrained to 140 characters. I can go and I could write something, and even if I wrote something stupid or someone critiqued it and later I'm like, I feel bad about that, I could always say, hey, it's just 140 characters. Of course I thought about that. They were trying to take advantage of mobile. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. So they're trying to take advantage of that technology shift. And then they were trying to build an open platform back then. Their objectives, they wanted 1 billion users. They were going to look at stickiness, so daily active users over weekly active users. From a priority perspective, they were just taking off, but they couldn't scale. Some of you might remember the fail whale. You'd get this whale saying, hey, Twitter's having a problem. It got known to be as fail whale. They were trying to ship on Android. They were trying to launch platform APIs. So those were some of the top priorities. They had a good understanding of what the jobs to be done were for Twitter. You were going to stay connected with your friends, keep up with news, interests, and brands. And then for the creators, the people who were tweeting in the early days, they realized that those people were trying to build their professional brands. So they want to be known for something. So they were tweeting quite a bit. And then they also had a really nice sense of who the target audience is. They were trying to target the content creators, because without content creators, all the other viewers weren't going to come in. So they had targeted entertainers, politicians, technologists, right? You can see that reemergence of Twitter. They struggled a little bit when Jack Dorsey came back, but now they're on an uprise. Part of that is because Trump and other politicians are actively in there using that as a system to get their message out. So again, a strong sense that it's the content creator that you have to build the system for first. And then they were targeting not the baby boomers, but the digital natives. So really Generation X and Y were their target. Try it out. It's a great tool. When you go through planning, quarterly planning, annual planning with any one of your product teams, you can put this in front of them and ask that leadership team to come together and try to fill out this form. I guarantee you that they will walk away with a better understanding of what they're trying to do. And again, the magic is that it's constrained to a single page, no smaller than 11-point font. And then the last thing I want to share before I open it up to questions is, this is probably one of the most important lessons that I've learned as a product leader. When I was a young product leader, I thought that my job was to come in and to put myself into a corner and develop ideas and priorities and strategies all on my own. I had this notion, this fantasy that people like Newton, these superhuman people who could save the world on their own, like in Western culture, that is such the vision that we have of what a great leader is, right? Newton goes under a tree, apple falls on his head, comes up with all the laws of relativity, and you admire that. That's actually not the way that the world works. Great product is always the product of a small number of people who have come together in a very trusted environment, and they are going to attack an idea, and they're going to do that in what I call creative confrontation. They are going to practice radical candor. They are going to attack the idea and not the people. People are not going to get upset when we try to chip away the edges on that idea to polish it, to make it better. So in that, you have to establish points in time in product development where you have these opportunities to practice creative confrontation. For me and my team, there's two meetings in particular that we have on an ongoing basis. One is called a demo trust. And in the demo trust, one of my teams will bring in some raw ideas. We'll have a small set of people, the engineering, design, marketing leader, myself, a couple other people, and we'll say, let's just look at what we're trying to do here. Let's give a demo. It's still a rough idea, and let's try to make that better. And it winds up after reading stories from other fields. I've discovered that this idea of creative confrontation exists elsewhere. It's very common in Hollywood, as an example. I read the book by one of the founders of Pixar, and he was talking about the brain trust. In building Pixar movies, they would get a small group of people that would get together, and they would be looking at the movies as the movies were being created. And that small group of people would be giving feedback on the storyline and some of the work itself. So that's an example of creative confrontation, making sure that you have opportunities to practice that with your craft. I think that's important. There's many ways to do it. So with that, before we open it up to ask me anything, I wanted to pause and just take 10 seconds. Think back at the first slide that I showed you. I was showing you pictures of boats and saying, hey, if the ships, which are your products, can only be as strong as the shipyard that builds them. And then I said that the values of your company, the people that you bring into your company, and then the processes by which those people work are the shipyard. I wanted you to reflect on the shipyard that you're building today. I wanted you to think about that for a few moments and maybe take just one of the things that I've shared with you today and maybe take it back and think about, have a discussion with your team about the shipyard that you want to build and maybe a thing that you might want to change.
Awesome. Well, Joff, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun. Cheers, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.